There's something really curious happening in Canada and even around the world when it comes to discussions about climate change. We routinely hear from certain people that we're in the middle of a climate crisis or a climate emergency, and yet these same people often do all kinds of activities which contribute to the crisis. Why is that? Today we're going to talk about this as well as some sensible ideas about how we can reduce emissions and address important environmental issues in Canada. But first, take a look at this clip from Prime Minister Trudeau talking about the climate crisis.
The climate crisis. The climate crisis. Climate crisis.
Now, what's interesting is that when you look at the Prime Minister's own activities, you often find that he engages in a lot of personal travel over great distances, emitting all kinds of emissions with the government jet. Here's a list of a few issues since 2019, when the Trudeau government passed a motion in Parliament declaring a climate emergency. In December, so a few months after this motion was passed, he traveled to Costa Rica for a family vacation. Again, that's quite a far distance. Then in 2021, he traveled across the country to Tofino, BC for the weekend to go surfing, instead of maybe traveling locally and doing something with lower emissions. In August of 2022, the Prime Minister traveled to Costa Rica, and a few months after that, he went to Jamaica for Christmas for a family vacation. In April of 2023, he traveled to Montana, and then a few months after that, again across the country to Tofino, and then this past Christmas, he traveled again to Jamaica for Christmas. So under normal circumstances, one wouldn't begrudge a Prime Minister for taking some vacations. But if we're in a crisis, then why is the government jet being used to contribute to the crisis with all these extra unnecessary emissions? It's a question worth discussing. Now, it's not just the Prime Minister and, say, Liberal politicians who are engaging in this type of activity. Across the country, we see city councils passing motions declaring climate emergencies and climate crises. And these city councils are made up of Liberals and Conservatives, New Democrats, people that maybe vote Green, etc. They cover the entire political spectrum. And yet some research from secondstreet.org shows that a number of these city councils have actually been handing out thousands of free parking passes to council members and staff. Again, thousands. And when you're giving someone a free parking pass, you're of course encouraging them to drive, which contributes to more emissions. So while these city councils are keen to get you to reduce your emissions, they're quite happy to keep their free parking passes. Now, this type of problem isn't unique to Canada. We see all kinds of examples politically in other countries. Over in the United Kingdom, when the COP28 environmental summit was taking place in Dubai, we saw that King Charles, who is quite outspoken about environmental emissions, took a private jet down to the conference, and Prime Minister Sunak also took a private jet, and past Prime Minister David Cameron also took a private jet. These three couldn't even private jet pool to the conference. And of course, they were joined by thousands of other people. 60,000 people from around the world got into airplanes and flew to this conference. Now, it would be entirely reasonable for some people to attend, but are 60,000 people really necessary to attend this? Why couldn't they video conference instead of flying to this conference? I guess it's more fun to fly to the conference to tell everyone else not to fly anymore. Now, we could go on with many other examples from the political world, but this is also a problem in pop culture as well. One great example is Leonardo DiCaprio. He will not stop talking about the environment and trying to get everyone else to reduce their emissions, but this is the same actor who actually took a private jet to fly to another country to accept an award for emissions. In the racing world, we saw Sebastian Vettel famously criticize Alberta's oil sands, saying that, Canada needs to do something about this. But interestingly enough, he was wearing a jersey at the time, which showed that he was sponsored by Saudi Arabia's Aramco oil refinery company. So this is someone who literally burns oil and gas products for a living, completely unnecessary, and he wants the rest of the world to reduce their emissions. The hypocrisy is off the charts often with people that are trying to tell others to reduce their emissions, and yet they're some of the worst offenders. We're going to delve into this subject in a moment. We'll be right back in just a second.